Yo, welcome back gamers. My name is Orcrist, and this is the third and final part of my SCW tutorial series. Today I'm going to be teaching you about buffered SCWs, which are used when an underground shrine's loading radius doesn't overlap with that of a nearby shrine. If you missed parts 1 and 2 of the series, they're linked in the top right corner. So far, we've learned how SCWs work, specifically the storage of one elevator to enter an underground shrine within that load radius. Now we'll talk about how to keep an elevator loaded so that when you leave that load radius, you don't lose storage. With the help of Leo Edlino, a friend of the Breath of the Wild speedrun community, we were able to understand how objects load and unload in Breath of the Wild. Simply put, NPCs, minor objects, shrines, elevators, everything loads in a certain frame every second. And as you move throughout the overworld, things unload on a certain frame. Breath of the Wild runs at 30 frames per second, so in theory, the moment you leave a shrine's load radius, the elevator will disappear on one of the following 30 frames of gameplay. Now, it isn't technically RNG, but we have no way of knowing whether it's on the first frame of unload, the 5th, the 21st, it could be any frame. So without the use of a debug menu, which we currently don't have, we just don't know when the elevator disappears. It is possible, however, to interrupt how objects unload by pausing the game in the quick menu. The method for keeping an elevator from disappearing after you leave its load radius is to press and hold either the left or right quick menu on the D-pad. If we picked the correct frame, the elevator is still technically loaded. You then release the D-pad so that only a couple of frames advance before pressing it again. If you can consistently unpause the game once every second in this manner, you can technically skip the unload frame for an elevator indefinitely because it only disappears on one specific frame. Sounds simple, right? Well, unfortunately this trick isn't as consistent as the probability looks on paper. Since we can't advance the game on one frame at a time, you're more than likely to advance the game on 2 or 3 frames per unpause. And it's not even as simple as, say, turning on a metronome and tapping a drum once per beat. The goal is to, for example, only unpause the game for frames 8 through 10 consistently for at least a minute, but maybe closer to 2 or 3 minutes depending on how good your launch is. If your pausing isn't frame perfect, which it won't be, human error alone might expose the game to unload frames 8 through 18 throughout the attempt. That puts the likelihood of failure at 1 in 3 for that attempt, which isn't good at all. So it's important to have a metronome or song playing at 60 beats per second, and you're consistently pausing and unpausing on the same beats each time, otherwise the buffered SCW can easily fail. Now I'm going to demonstrate the buffered SCW in its entirety, with metronome and frames highlighted so that you get a better sense of things. Once we get storage, start your metronome immediately, and maybe even say a little prayer. After the bomb launches Link, most people pause the game immediately to start their buffers. As Link ragdolls through the air, keep an eye on where he is in his flight. You can pull the glider as early as Link hits the top of his arc, but for Taloneg, it's a good idea to wait until you're a bit lower to pull the glider. And fair warning guys, pulling the glider when you mean to while still buffering correctly is really hard, but this is the first opportunity for the elevator to unload, so you have to be tight with it. It's also worthwhile to study the object map so that you know where on the map you can make your earliest landing. For Lachnoroki, it's on the edge of the water next to the bridge, and for Rakazunzo, it's on the other side of these plants with the Hydromelon, or a few yards away from the Sandseal race starting line. As you glide through the air, continue to buffer the menu on the same beats every time. If your speed is pretty slow, or you're doing Rakazunzo, it's worthwhile to hold forward on the control stick. After you cancel the glider, be sure to give yourself enough time to pull the glider before landing again. So that's what it looks like when the storage works. You land, and the game pulls you into the elevator you got storage from, and when you press X to skip the cutscene, the game goes into the loading screen. But let's say that nothing happens when you land. This means that the elevator disappeared and you have to start the trick over. But what exactly happened? Unfortunately, there are a number of reasons the elevator couldn't load. You could have failed because of bad rhythm in your pausing, or maybe you let too many frames pass when you attempted to pull the glider. It can also fail if you don't land on level ground or you clip a tree on your landing. Link needs to be fully grounded to get the elevator cutscene, just like any other SCW. And then there's the unpredictable yet predictable. You simply chose the wrong frame to pause on and the elevator unloaded anyway. There's just no real way to tell yet. You can also fail to pull the glider before landing and take fall damage, which will interrupt the elevator cutscene. But all isn't lost, guys. If you simply keep buffering until Link stands up again, you can still maintain storage. One bit of advice, if you land and don't get the cutscene trigger immediately, keep pausing for a few seconds to see if you get it. You may still get lucky. Okay, hot take alert on these buffered SCWs. In part 1, we mentioned that in theory, you can SCW into any underground shrine. You might be wondering if it's possible to wrong warp into Shaka Tatone. You know, that one shrine with the orb girl who wants to see photos of guardians? This SCW would mean you could skip downloading the camera entirely. But if you attempted even one of these buffered SCWs, you can tell just from the map how hard this would be. It's simply too far away from any nearby shrine to be viable for a speedrun. This also goes for Eventide and Tawajin, the Hinox Brothers shrine. I'm sure something will be found eventually to make skipping these shrines and the camera viable for us speedrunners, but today is not that day. So that pretty much covers everything for the Shrine Coordinate Warp tutorial. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, everyone. It really helps me out a lot. This is my first attempt at making videos, and I'm mostly happy with how everything came out. Before you go, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and check me out on Twitch and Twitter at Orcrist_GC. But until then, good luck going fast, gamers.